Welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today we're going to talk about water treatment. I've kind of touched a little bit about water treatment in some of the other videos. We talked about some filters, we talked about iodine, we've talked about pumps and stuff like that, and I wanted to kind of spend a little bit more time talking a little bit more in depth in treating water. Hopefully it's not too boring of a subject, but I think it's an important subject, one that a lot of people don't think about. We often talk about treating water in a wilderness context from like hiking and camping. We talk about treating water in emergency preparedness context. So when if grid goes down, we don't have water or there's a boil warning. And then there's the travel, where one might need to treat their water because of where they're at. And so there's a lot of different options, and there's, a lot of confusion about it. And what doesn't help is that there's a lot of people who've probably never really treated water before, but they've read about it in a manual. And so they kind of talk about water treatment from learning about it from a manual without actually having to do it. And then worse off are the people that I see a lot of times in particular on YouTube, not to, cast blame or whatever, but, they just kind of pick up what other people say and then they just repeat it, and then things perpetuate. So one of my biggest pet peeves personally, I guess, is, I don't know if it's a pet peeve, but, I hear a lot of people talking about treating water and relying on boiling. And so, they'll say, get a stainless steel single wall bottle like this. And if you're in an emergency situation or whatever, that you can just boil the water and that'll be fine. And yes, you can treat water by boiling. And yes, I have treated water by boiling. And I will say that if there's other options available, there are way better options to do that. So thinking about it, if you're going to treat your water by boiling, you're going to have to stop with whatever you're doing. You'll have to collect firewood. You'll have to build the fire. You'll have to put the water that's in the bottle in the fire. Wait for it to boil. And then take it out of the fire. So you'll have to fashion some kind of, sticks or whatever to pull it out. And then wait for it to cool before you drink it. And if it's a small bottle like this, it's not going to be a lot of water, and that's a whole lot of time and resources put into for just a little bit of water. And so when people think about this type of stuff, the bug out scenario, a lot of it's just fantasy in many ways, and it's not real actual water treatment, or it's not an actual. It's a good way to treat the water, but it doesn't also solve all the problems, in that you're moving and you're trying to get to safety. I'm not going to spend an hour or an hour and a half or more for this amount of water, or even if I had multiple bottles or a bigger bottle. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, alternatively, you could use a stove and have a pot, like a jet boil or one of these pocket rockets from MSR, and boil water without having to worry about worrying about having to stop and boil and taking the time to build a fire. But then you're still using resources. There's only so much fuel in here, and so do you really want to be using that fuel for a small amount of water again? And then lastly, or kind of just as important, is that although you're boiling water, and boiling water kills those protozoa, and it'll kill the bacteria and viruses. But if there's still heavy metals, if there's a lot of hormones in the water, fertilizers, high nitrogen, things like that, it's still going to be in there, and it's still unhealthy. So when we approach surface water, it's pretty dangerous and it's pretty sketchy. If you're in a city area, you've got oil and you've got tons of chemicals. You've got people that use birth control, for example, or just spill their pills down the toilet. All of this stuff kind of adds hormones to the water. It adds, there's additives to the water that you're filtering or you're boiling isn't going to do anything. And so for me personally, if I'm going on a canoe trip, for example, in and around a city area or going through cities in particular or a bigger river, I'm not going to stop and pump, filter, treat that water. I'm going to pack all of my own water. It's just not safe, and it's just not worth the risk. And so, when you're in a wilderness context and people are reading about treating water in a wilderness context, that water is much more pristine. And it's clear because there's not a lot of wilderness left, first off, but it's farther away from cities. Generally, it's harder to get to. The water isn't susceptible as much to some of the contaminations that we're seeing in and around cities or in rural areas. So rural areas have a lot of contaminated water, and there's areas where water might look like it's coming out of the ground in karst regions, so like southwest Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, where the limestone is very very high in the strata of the soil, and then you get essentially what it look like. They're underground rivers essentially that looks like spring water, but it's really surface water just under the ground. And it's not really, it's somewhat filtered from the ground, but not really as much. It's coming up like say from an aquifer. And so it kind of gives you the illusion of safe water, but it's going to, nitrates are going to spike, with fertilizers, and there's still going to be E. coli and things like that from large farms and such. So, to think that you can find safe water to drink in rural areas and urban areas, it's not as easy as you'd think. It's a little bit harder than you would think. So boiling water really isn't that great of an option as a first thought, in at least to me, in any context. Second is you're going to see a lot of people who talk about the Sawyer filters, and this is just the straw type filter. This particular one, there's different designs. This particular one is you can drop this into a stream or a pot or what have you, and then drink from it, just sucking the water right out of the bottle. And that's fine if the water is fairly clean. These are very inexpensive. That's why a lot of people talk about these things. But if it gets clogged, and you don't have that big syringe to clear out any clogging, or you just don't get it unclogged, you're putting a lot of your faith into something that you can't fix. It's something that you can't. It's essentially a throwaway product, and again, you're putting all of your resources and time into something like this that it doesn't really produce a whole lot of water, enough for a person to drink if they have to stop and get water. So just sipping every once in a while from a stream, or carrying water in a pot or a water bottle like this, contaminating the water bottle, I mean, that's fine, and it's doable. It is what it is. But to think that this is the end all be all of the filters is not. If you're drinking water out of that's relatively clear, that might be a possibility. Using this for travel would be a good thing. But like anything, in any way to treat water, having one way to treat the water is not often the best. You want to have multiple ways. So this is a way. I would call that a survival maybe tool for an individual that might, but I wouldn't use this to rely on. Certainly, I wouldn't plan a trip or an emergency around something like this, just as I wouldn't with boiling. Another option that's fairly popular and has been around for a long time is iodine, and this is an old bottle, so this is just a demonstration bottle, really. And iodine is just time-tested way of treating water. It's very effective. You take 2 tablets, put it in your water bottle, let it dissolve, and in about 30 minutes, you have some fairly safe water. The problem with iodine is that not everybody can use iodine. If you have a shellfish allergy, for example, or you're just allergic to iodine, that's not going to be a really good way to treat your water. This is lightweight, it's inexpensive, although the bottle is falling apart here, you can see. This is a really old bottle. The iodine itself is going to be fine. But it's not a total solution at all, and it's not something that I would rely on if you're hiking in a wilderness area and you just want to kill the protozoa. Then certainly just dropping a couple, fill up your water bottles, drop a couple iodine tablets in there, and then continue your hike. 30 minutes later, you've got yourself clean water. One of the disadvantages of iodine, aside from allergies, is also that it's not as effective in the winter. So the colder the environment, the longer it's going to take for the iodine to work, too. So it's not a perfect solution either. So one thing, if you're allergic to iodine, you can use chlorine as an alternative, and you can buy chlorine tablets. That works for those individuals. Alternatively, too, is you can use bleach. So it takes about 8 drops of water. So if you have a little dropper, 8 drops of bleach, into a gallon of water. That'll treat an entire gallon. Now that's a great solution. If the water's been fairly pre-treated, there's a boil warning, and you can't boil, but you could use still bleach to treat a ton of water at home. But are you going to use bleach, 8 drops for a gallon of water? It's going to have to be, if you had 2 quarts of water, that's 8 drops. So that's certainly more doable. Or if you had a larger container, bladder or something that you could hold a gallon of water in, then you could certainly use the bleach as an option. And then you can also add bleach in with your cooking gear just for sanitizing your dishes and things like that. So it might be something you already have. And similarly, you might already have iodine in your first aid kit with as well, that you could dip into in an emergency situation, for example. It's probably not something I would rely on. But again, bleach or iodine from your first aid kit and bleach from your cooking kit could be backups that you could think of. But certainly, you want to be careful about chlorine. You don't want to overdo it. And like iodine, it's going to affect the taste of the water as well. With iodine, I'm not sure with chlorine, but I know with iodine for sure, if you put any kind of citrus in with the iodine to cover that taste, you're actually going to make the iodine not as effective either. So it's going to counter the efficacy of the iodine. So by mixing, lemonade or orange juice mix or something like that, you have to wait the 30 minutes before you can mix to cover that taste too. So a little bulkier is a filter. This is just a backpacking filter. It's going to bring a little bit more bulk, a little bit more weight. But the advantage is that I can take this filter out. I can have a spare filter. I can take apart the whole filter. I can fix anything that breaks. One thing that you want to keep in mind too is you have a dirty hose and you have a clean hose, and both of those shouldn't touch each other. So you're going to want to have some kind of bag to keep your clean hose in, to keep that from contaminating. Some filters come with adapters to adapt to a bladder or a large wide mouth water bottle that you can use to fill, which makes it handy. Disadvantages of a pump, aside from weight and bulk, is that it's just a plastic housing that's protecting you from getting contaminated. So if you were to fall or you were to drop your pack and you were to crack the housing, then you would be out of a reliable filter. So for me, when I pack a filter, I always pack it in a padded case for that reason. And then also in the case, I keep all of the things that I need for the filter so I can hand that off to somebody if they're going to go get water, for example, and they'll have everything that they need. So they'll have an extra filter. They'll have the ability to, we can clean the filter too. We have coffee filters, which makes for a good pre-filter. There is a screen on here, which does work quite well, but if you want to protect your filter, pre-filtering sometimes works. Often I'll hand somebody either a wash tub or another pot like this, and they'll actually filter, take the water out of the pot, let it settle for a few minutes, and then filter right out of the pot as the sediment stays on the bottom. And that helps kind of keep the filter from getting clogged. And then I like to also carry some extra bladders of some kind. For backpacking, this is what I carry. I have a bigger one for canoe camping, if you're using a lot more water. Another option too, which is probably one of my favorites, is Polarpure. If I'm in a wilderness area, this is a liquid iodine, so there's actually iodine crystals inside the bottom, and basically you use the cap as a measuring device, and you pour the water into the cap and then into your bottle, and then you just refill the bottle. It doesn't matter with dirty water or clean water, and then you have a continuous source of iodine, and it lasts nearly forever, and it's a much better option, I think, than pills, personally. The disadvantage is that oftentimes some places do not allow glass in their wilderness areas, so you'll want to make sure that you aren't breaking the rules on that. What I've done is I've kind of fashioned a little koozie for my bottle. I've never broken one of these bottles, but I've never really wanted to try. So if I'm going to go on a backpacking trip, I take Polarpure, and that is going to be kind of one level of clarifying your water, and then I have a filter. And you can get filters with a larger or smaller micron capability that will take out viruses, bacteria. So if you're traveling in the internationally to like the developing world, you might want to consider something like that. Here in America, we don't have too much of a problem with viral transmissions in our water sources. Never say never, but it's at this point we have a bigger problem with lead, for example, in our water. So what's the best solution? What's the best way to treat your water? I would say that there is no one great solution. I'd say that it's a combination of different solutions. To think about, always think about having a backup, have a primary, a secondary, and a contingency. I think that's always fine. So if I can't, use Polarpure, I'll pump. And for one or two people, a pump like this is great. If you have a bigger group of people, you might want a second pump to help kind of keep the process going. If you have a really big group of people, then you can boil water as well. And it's not a bad function. So if you have a campfire going, you're cooking over your fire, you already have that. There's no sense in wasting your time pumping. If you want to boil a big, thing of water for everybody for the next day and after it's cooled off. It's about the right kind of application for the right situation. And that's kind of the point of this video. When people say, and they rely on, specific tasks, or specific techniques for kind of a generalized emergency situation, I don't think it really does anybody any good. To teach people to boil their water and then get a fish spreader and put it in there, and hang it over the water. I mean, to me, that's just ridiculous. Just throw some iodine in here and keep walking. if it's relatively clean water, right? If it's truly spring water, you might not need to treat it at all. I might be careful about bacteria, and just throw in a little bleach or something, or iodine. But and if you're wilderness canoeing in a lot of places, you could still drink right out of the lake, just not along the shore. Do that at your own risk. Certainly, the National Park Service isn't going to tell you not to drink, not to treat the water, because they don't want to be held liable for that. So, but I mean, there, and I will say that there are a lot of places that you think are pristine, and they're not as pristine because of development, mining, and things like that. I look at, there are some places that are suspect, for degradation by large corporations and mining corporations and things like that. That ruin our wilderness. And so all of that is creeping into the areas where water is supposed to be pristine, where we want the water to be as clean as possible, by voting for politicians who like that sort of thing. That's what you get when you vote. So, is there one solution? No. Are there a lot of different techniques? Yes. And I think that's going to match. It needs to match what you're trying to do. Are there viruses, bacteria, protozoa, cryptosporidia, giardia? Are you looking to filter those things out, or are you looking to kill those things? The idea here is often to treat the water as best as you possibly can using the tools that you have available to you, and not just get dogmatic about one specific thing, or think that one way is going to cover it. If you truly need to be concerned about clean water, as we all should be, especially in an emergency, then we need to think about this stuff ahead of time. I didn't talk about UV too much. UV works really well for particularly clear water. So sterilizing pens are a fine option for places with relatively clean water. If you got a lot of tannins in the water, it's not going to be as effective. It's like the Northwoods and that kind of stuff, may not be, or a real muddy kind of, so. But UV does work, and UV is free when it comes from the sun. So you can take a clear water bottle, fill it up, and put it out in the sun. And after some time, a few hours, the UV has sterilized it, and then you can drink it. So if you've got the time, that works. If you have any questions or want some directions, we have a sanitation guide on the printout on the blog. We'll put it down, a link down below in the descriptions. If you've got a different way of treating water or different thoughts on this, please chime in. Let me know. I'd be happy to. It'd be fun to have a conversation about treating water. I think it's really important, and I think you kind of need to approach it with a all solutions possible approach, and not just kind of a one way dogmatic kind of survival situation, whatever. The other thing I'll say too is, in closing, is almost nobody ever talks about solar stills for treating water in a survival situation. And that's probably one of the best ways in all environments to get water in a survival. So all it takes is carrying some plastic sheeting, having a cup if you can, that'd be great, and then a straw if you have one as well. But just some plastic sheeting, or any kind of, your Mylar blanket would work fine too. If you had that, dig a hole, put vegetation in that hole. The sun transpires, or the moisture comes out of those plants and the ground as well, condenses on the Mylar blanket. Then you put a little rock in the middle of the blanket, and the water drips then off the blanket into a cup, where then you can retrieve the cup, or you can sip out of it with a straw if you had a long enough straw. If you had like something like this, some surgical tubing. And so you can get water in, the winter, in the desert, in the tropical area, on oceans, pretty much anywhere you can get good, clean drinking water that way. It just takes a lot of time, and it might take quite a bit of vegetation, or depending on this, how much moisture is in the soil. But very, very few survival experts actually talk about that method. I don't know why. But again, that's one of those things that you want to think about in your, pace planning of water. You have a primary, you have an alternate, you have a contingency, and you have an emergency. And be prepared for all of these things. Think about the tools that you have with you and how you can treat water beyond the normal stuff like this, and thinking about iodine in your first aid kit or chlorine bleach in your cupboard. And just, again, don't get so dogmatic thinking about, you might need multiple ways to treat water, both iodine and filtering. I've done that many times. I've drank water right out of the source. I've used boiled. I've done all of these things, and I can tell you, if you can get away with Polar Pure, just using iodine solution or an iodine tablet even, it's a heck of a lot less work than sitting in the stream side pumping, or even worse, wasting time building a fire, letting the water cool. So I always suggest for people that are doing videos and stuff to actually go out and do the things that they're talking about. That's kind of helpful. So with that, I appreciate your time and attention. I just have kind of talked about water treatment maybe a couple times, but I really wanted to spend a little bit more time kind of getting into the background. If there's an area that I was unclear, or I could have been a little bit helpful, just let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.